Well, welcome. Thank you for joining me today for an episode of Life Changes. I am Jay. And as usual, I'll be talking to you about if I don't choose a specific topic on astrology, I will analyze a specific chart of someone in particular who I think is fascinating or interesting, or maybe someone popular, something that's going on that I think would be helpful to address through astrology. So today, the person I'm going to talk about is someone who has a rich history in sports. As you've watched any of my other episodes, you know that I have spoken about some people in sports. One person, Tom Brady. This person is another GOAT in the sports industry, and that is none other than Michael Jordan. Kind of hard not to know who he is. He's with the Chicago Bulls, won several championships with them. He's one of the most popular, most recognizable athletes, even for those who may not have been born or may not have been watching the NBA or basketball around the time that he was playing. You know who Michael Jordan is more than likely, if not for his sports, for his shoes. So today, I think there's a lot of places I could go with his chart, but the direction I'm going to take with this episode is I'm going to specifically talk about his Nike deal. And for that, my phone. So in terms of his Nike deal, for one thing, I felt like it was really fascinating for a lot of reasons. It was like the only one of its kind for the most part, and that's one of the reasons why he's so popular and so important in the sports industry, because his deal with Nike really changed a lot of things. If you haven't had a chance to watch the movie Air, starring who is it? Star Ben Affleck. Um, he he's in the movie along with his best friend and actor and collaborator. And forgive me for right now, I can't think of his name, but I'll probably think of it a little later. But they did a movie called Air, and it was about Michael Jordan and that deal that he did with Nike and how it came about. Fascinating movie. I absolutely recommend that you watch it. I absolutely love the movie. But anyway, if you are not familiar with it, I'll give you little details about that. So he signed the Nike deal August 19th, 1984. And for that, they created a signature shoe for Jordan called the Air Jordan. And they had a really popular commercial, and I don't remember it very well because I was so very young at that time. But the commercial had Spike Lee, and he played Mars Blackman. And throughout the commercial, he would attempt to find out the source of Jordan's exceptional basketball abilities. And he was convinced that it had to be the shoes. So it was a successful campaign. And with the hype and the demand for the shoes, there was a such thing as shoe jackings. Those of you that are in the hip hop or urban community, you're probably very familiar with this, where there were people, sometimes kids, being robbed at gunpoint for their Air Jordans, which is really unfortunate because some people get robbed, but beat up. Some people even got shot for them. But that's how popular the Air Jordans became. And so it was so popular that Nike spun off the Jordan line into its own division named the Jordan brand. So he started with just getting a deal with Nike just to have a shoe, but it was so exceptionally popular that he got his own division. And it was the first deal with an athlete where they paid him a percentage for using his likeness. They had never done that before. And they talk about that in the movie Air, and how there was a lot of pushback about that. They felt like, oh, we don't do that for athletes. And basically, Jordan's mother was like, well, you will do this for my son. So I told you, I love the movie. It was absolutely great. But I'm going to go back to August 19th, 1984, and I'm going to look into a few, like a handful of things that really stood out to me that may have suggested that this was going to be such a monumental time for him as well as for sports and what it was going to mean. So first, I'm going to mention that, you know what, I'm going to switch the order of this a little bit. So the first thing I noticed when I first initially looked at his chart, I didn't look at just the birth chart. I went to his progress chart. And for those of you that have just tuned in, may not be familiar because you haven't seen my other, maybe you haven't seen my other videos about this, but the progress chart is when you take the chart and you move it forward to a specific date. So I'm moving it forward to August 1984 for him. It's backwards now, but at the time it would have been forward. And on that day, he had what was called a yad. Again, if you watched any of my other videos, you've heard me mention yads quite a bit. And this yad makes a lot of sense when you consider the fact that this deal was so monumental. So he had a yad, and that yad was between progressed Mercury, where Mercury was at the apex or the top of the yod, because remember the yod is in the shape of a triangle, like a long triangle. So Mercury was at the top, and then he had progressed Mars and then progressed Moon. So the Mars and the Moon were making the sextile, and then you had Mercury up at the top, and they were in what they call a quincunx. I may be saying this wrong. Sometimes I say it wrong. But anyway, the Mercury or the apex or the top was pointing towards his progress chart. It was pointing towards the eighth house. The eighth house. So I've talked a lot about the houses. I have a whole slew of episodes where I talk about that different houses, the different planets, and explain what they reference. So eighth house, always a very complicated house. A lot of people are fascinated with that house. It's most known as a house of other people's money. People say death, but that doesn't necessarily need to be literal. Sometimes it's figurative, or maybe just some type of ending or transformation or transition. It's also rules sex, but in this specific situation, I think it had a lot to do with one, other people's money, because he did get other people's money. He got Nike's money. Nike's money, because I believe they did pay him a specific amount. In the movie, they gave him a car, so he got a car. So they did give him something. But in addition to that, the eighth house rules shared resources. And it is kind of a shared resource. So it started out as Nike's money, but then because of its popularity and basically Michael having a partial ownership in his own shoe, it was like a partnership, and they were sharing the resources, giving him a percentage. They were in like a deal together, if you will. And so it was shared resources. It was shared money, and then they was dispersed as need be. And there's also an element of transformation in terms of this changing the way athletes get paid or can get paid. Now, this wasn't immediate, and I believe in later years they started doing things like advocating for college athletes to get paid, get endorsements or ways to get paid, which I totally understand. If you're pretty certain someone's going in the NFL or the NBA and they're in college, why not go ahead and start allowing them to get some money? They may not make the money that they would make once they get in the league, but I think it's okay to let them go ahead and get started to make money. So I feel like this was the predecessor. This was like huge at the time, and then it got even bigger than I think people even realized. And even though Nike was concerned, according to the movie, Nike was concerned that if they give this piece of the pie to Jordan, that they were going to miss out and they were going to be without, or it was going to cost them less or they were going to lose, but actually they ended up making more and being able to acquire other sneaker companies just by doing, I guess you could say, the right thing. To me, it felt like the right thing to do. So this was really transformational. And so to me, that yod pointing toward the eighth house has more to do with the transformation of that deal and the overall opportunity for things to go in a completely different direction for athletes, all athletes, not just for Jordan, but for the athletes that came after him. And so to me, that yod to show up like that, first of all, again, if you've heard me talk about the yods, you know that yods are not, they feel sudden, but they're not sudden. They're usually things that you've been working on for a very long time. And obviously, if Jordan was going in the NBA, he had been practicing basketball for a while and he had been honing his craft, trying to get better and be the best that he could possibly be so he could enter the league. So this was something that wasn't overnight. Even the deal itself didn't take place overnight. They were working really hard to even get a meeting with him. So everything was not immediate, but the yod shows the impact of how important it was. And so that was the first thing I noticed, is that huge yod in his progress chart showing how important this event in his life would be. That's number one. Number two, I saw the solar return DNA in his solar return sixth house conjunct the natal DC or a descendant in the seventh house. I don't talk about DNA a whole lot, but I have talked about it a little bit in a previous episode. To me, DNA is just referring to an opportunity for events, and there are different points in areas in our chart, or even mathematical points where there's opportunities for something important to happen. And in my opinion, the DNA is another one of them. Now, I read that it's supposed to have something to do with pregnancy, but obviously Jordan was not getting pregnant at that time. So to me, it was just an opportunity for an event. And being that the sixth house was involved, this was obviously a work-related type of situation, even though he's very young. He's entering the NBA to be an athlete, and that's definitely work. So that's the second thing I noticed. And then continuing with the solar return chart, I saw that he had his solar return seventh house over the natal or birth chart eighth house. So seventh house is usually about other people, and of course, if you read anything about the seventh house or astrology, even at the beginning level, you probably heard that the seventh house is usually more associated with marriage. But it's not always about marriage. It is about other people often and how we interact with them, but not so much marriage. A lot of people miss that it's also about law. It's about contracts and negotiations. And so obviously, again, if you know business, but then if you saw the movie, you saw the negotiation that was taking place in order to, like I said earlier, even get a meeting with Jordan, because he didn't even, according to the movie, he didn't even want to meet with Nike. He was going in a different direction. He was going to go to one of the other sneaker companies. And so everything that went into getting just a meeting with Michael and having to have the buy-in from his mother for her to influence and persuade him to take this meeting. I know you didn't want to go here, but let's just go here anyway. And, let's see what happens. So just the idea of that, just the idea of the negotiation that goes into it. And then you have it over the eighth house, which we already talked about. This is about shared resources. And it's kind of was like a windfall for him over many years that just picked up steam. And I've talked before about how the eighth house is one of the money houses. and obviously other people's money, but it's usually not earned income. And while Jordan did earn the income because he was the one who went through the practices, he was the one that perfected his craft, he was the one that was on that he was the one that was on that court playing the game, and he was the one a lot of people were looking at. But this type of money that he was receiving wasn't necessarily about him playing the game, especially after he retired. He's continued to make a lot of money, even though he's not playing the game. So that's the thing about the eighth house money. It's about the money that you get that's replicated. It replicates almost on its own. Some people might think about trading or being in the stock market or compound interest, some people might say. I feel like that probably comes under the eighth house. So think in those terms. So for him to have his solar return seventh house over the eighth house is letting me know that this was something that was going to be perpetual for him. And it was just like one effort, one negotiation contract put in place, and boom, now we have this thing that's going to last year after year after year. Then he also had his solar return second house over his third house. To me, that's like the money house over the house around news. I've said before, the third house, just like the other houses, it can mean several things, but one thing I associate it with the most is news, because I know in my own chart, I've often received news or given news and whenever the third house was triggered. And so I think that's an appropriate way to look at it sometimes, is getting or receiving a message or news or doing something along those lines. And so this having to do with money, because second house is the money, like the first money house, and it is about earned income. And so initially it's earned, and then the eighth house shows the perpetual accumulation of money. And then last but not least, he had his transiting Jupiter in the natal sixth house, or the birth chart sixth house. And to me, this just means earning money for work. And I would say earning more money for work, but really he was just starting. And so he was just entering leap, and this was an opportunity for him to make more money. Jupiter, in case you would like to, you can always take a look at my one of my episodes about the planets where I talk about Jupiter. Jupiter is about expansion. It is more the planet that's more closely related to money and abundance from that perspective. And so him having that there in a sixth house, which is usually associated with work and the work environment, is all kind of ties together with everything else that was going on in his chart at the time to suggest that, hey, I'm supporting the fact that, yes, this is a big moment, and he has an opportunity to really get a lot from it. And so that's pretty much what I saw about his chart. When I saw it, I thought it was fascinating, wanted to share it. So what are your thoughts? Tell me what you know about Michael Jordan's chart, or another person's chart that you want me to take a look at, or just something fun or interesting you think about Michael Jordan. So that's pretty much all I have for this episode. Thank you for tuning in, and I will see you next time.